Humanity's first true ambassador to the stars was never chosen. He was captured. 22 years before Earth officially joined any galactic community. A single human survey vessel drifted too far past the edge of charted space and was quietly, efficiently taken by a Corvathi border patrol. Of the 11 crew aboard, only one survived the boarding. His name was Ellis Duran, and the Corvathi Dominion, in its infinite bureaucratic patience, decided he was worth more alive than dead. They just didn't understand for 22 years exactly what that was going to cost them. Ellis Duran was 26 years old when they put him in the glass room for the first time. It wasn't a cell, technically. The Corvathi were meticulous about the distinction. A cell implied punishment. This was, the translator assured him in its flat administrative tone, an observation and cultural integration suite. High cataloger Resson studied him through the glass the way a naturalist studies a new specimen. Not cruel, exactly, just entirely without the concept that cruelty might apply here at all. You will be our resource, Resson said. In time, the Dominion will make contact with your species properly. When we do, we will need someone who understands you, who can tell us how you think, what you fear, how you can be managed. Ellis said nothing for a long moment. Then, okay. Resson's antennae twitched. Surprise Ellis would later learn to recognize. You agree so easily. You're going to meet us eventually either way, Ellis said. Might as well be someone in the room who actually knows something. It was. Ellis would think much later, the truest thing he ever said to them, and also the most deliberately incomplete. By his 6th year in the annex, Ellis had a title, a modest apartment on the administrative deck, and something almost like standing. The Dominion had stopped treating him as a specimen and started treating him as an instrument, expensive, useful, worth maintaining. He taught seminars to young Corvathi diplomats being groomed for eventual human contact. He wrote psychological profiles. He built decision trees. If the humans do X, they likely mean Y. If provoked in manner A, expect response B. Every profile was subtly, carefully wrong, not wrong enough to be caught. Ellis was too good for that, and the Corvathi too confident in their own analytical rigor to look hard enough at a resource that had never once given them a reason to doubt him. He told them humans valued individual life above collective outcome, when the opposite was often truer in a crisis. He told them human aggression peaked and then reliably cooled after a show of overwhelming force, when history suggested almost precisely the reverse. He told them human command structures were rigid and slow to adapt, when in truth, humanity's entire military doctrine for 2 centuries had been built around exactly the opposite. Young diplomat Ves Kaylor, sharpest of his students, once asked him directly, "Why do you help us prepare for a war against your own people?" Ellis looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not preparing you for a war," he said. "I'm preparing you for the war you think you're going to have." Ves frowned, turned the sentence over, and did not understand it. Ellis had learned by then that most of what mattered about humans could be said to the Corvathi's faces and they still wouldn't hear it. By his 14th year, Ellis Duran was, by any Corvathi metric, the single most trusted human-adjacent asset in the Dominion. He had trained 3 generations of diplomats, 2 generations of military intelligence officers, and had personally authored the Duran Doctrine, the Dominion's official first contact protocol for humanity, taught in every academy from the capital to the border fleets. The doctrine's central thesis, elegant and confident, was this: humans respond to strength with caution and to overwhelming force with rapid capitulation. A single decisive demonstration of superior power, delivered early and without hesitation, will minimize resistance and secure favorable terms. High cataloger Resson, old now, gray-scaled and slower than he'd been 22 years earlier, brought Ellis the finalized first contact fleet deployment plans as a courtesy, the way one might show an old colleague the fruits of a long collaboration. "Your work built this, Ellis," Resson said, something almost like fondness in his flat administrative voice. 22 years and we finally understand your species well enough to approach them properly." Ellis looked at the deployment plans for a long time. 11 capital ships. A show of force positioned at the edge of Sol system. Time to arrive with maximum visibility and minimum warning. The textbook application of the doctrine bearing his own name. When? Ellis asked quietly. Were you planning to tell me I could go home? Reson's antennae dipped. Something like discomfort. Your usefulness to the Dominion has not concluded. I didn't ask if I was still useful, Ellis said. I asked when you were planning to let me go home. Reson did not answer. Ellis had by then expected as much. It was, in its own quiet way, the last piece of confirmation he needed. The 11-ship fleet dropped out of slipspace at the edge of Sol system exactly as the Duran doctrine prescribed. Sudden, overwhelming, unmistakable, timed for maximum psychological effect. Fleet Commander Threll, Reson's son, groomed for this exact moment since childhood on Ellis Duran's own curriculum, watched the tactical display fill with human response contacts and felt, for the first time in his disciplined life, a flicker of doubt. Sir, his sensor officer said carefully, the human response is not consistent with doctrine. Define inconsistent. They're not retreating to defensive posture. They're not opening diplomatic channels requesting terms. The officer's mandibles clicked, uncertain. They're already moving to intercept. All of them, simultaneously, before we've even transmitted our demonstration hail. Threll stared at the display. Ellis Duran's doctrine, drilled into him since he was old enough to sit in a classroom, said humans facing overwhelming force showed caution first, capitulation second. It did not account for a fleet that had apparently been holding position, fully armed, fully coordinated, waiting for exactly this moment for longer than Threll had been alive. Signal High Cataloger Reson, Threll said, voice tight. Ask him if the doctrine accounts for this. There was a long pause before the response came back. Relayed word for word from an old Korvathi analyst standing in a research annex 200 light-years away, staring at the same tactical feed with an expression his species had no good name for. The doctrine does not account for this. Ask Ellis Duran, they asked Ellis Duran Ellis, watching the same feed from the observation suite that had been his home for 22 years. Allowed himself for the first time in over 2 decades, something close to a smile. Tell them, he said, that I told them the truth every single time. Humans respond to strength with caution, and to overwhelming force with rapid capitulation. He paused. I never told them what strength looked like to us. I let them assume they already knew. Reson found him in the observation suite one last time. The glass between them feeling for the first time in 22 years. Less like a boundary and more like a mirror. 22 years, Reson said quietly. Every profile. Every lecture. Every doctrine bearing your name. All of it not lies, Ellis said. Not one thing I told you was technically false. I just never told you which truths mattered. He looked at the old Korvathi through the glass, and for a moment something almost gentle crossed his face. You asked me to teach you how humans think, Reson. I did. I just never mentioned that the first thing you should have learned is that we don't consider patience and permission to be the same thing. The fleet, Reson said. Threll is currently finding out, Ellis said, that humanity has spent 22 years wondering exactly when someone was going to test the doctrine I wrote for you. We weren't hiding from it, Reson. We were waiting for it. Reson was quiet for a long time. Why did you never simply refuse to help us? Ellis considered the question with the same care he'd given every question in that glass room for 22 years. Because refusing would have meant you found someone else, he said. Someone who might have actually gotten it right. Ellis Duran stood in a debriefing room in Geneva that smelled nothing like recycled Korvathi air, wearing a jacket that still didn't quite fit right after 22 years in a body that had grown used to smaller gravity. You could have escaped a dozen times in 22 years, the debriefing officer said. Not quite a question. I thought about it, Ellis admitted, but an escaped human tells them nothing. A trusted one gets to write the book they'll actually follow into a trap. He looked out the window at a sky he hadn't seen in over 2 decades. 22 years is a long apprenticeship, but they only get to use the doctrine once. The officer studied him for a long moment. Welcome home, Mr. Duran. Ellis Duran didn't answer right away. He was still learning, 22 years late, that some homecomings take longer to arrive than the ship that carries them. It's good to be somewhere, he said finally, where nobody needs me to teach them what I am. If you loved a twist where the human wasn't a hostage, he was the trap. Smash that like button and drop a comment on whether you'd have had the patience to wait 22 years for the payoff. Stay human. Stay patient.